As a global builder, you need to understand that the use cases are really localized. And if you want to build for frontier markets, you're going to need to have a lot of frontier knowledge localized. I also believe that stablecoins will start to decouple from crypto prices. There is this company called Grupo Murano that they are a real estate company based out of Mexico. Basically, they said that they are investing around of $10 billion to create a Bitcoin treasury. Do you think that this company could be the next MicroStrategy? Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Frontera, where we analyze what's happening in crypto in frontier markets. And this is a really exciting week. We have a new MicroStrategy in Latin America. We're going to talk all about it. Also, some rumors, and more than rumors, a report of the IMF saying that El Salvador is not buying more Bitcoin, but we basically every week we report that El Salvador is buying more Bitcoin. So what's happening? And also a lot of different news. I'm Ab, co-founder and CEO of Bando. I'm with my great friend Kush, founder of Odisea. How are you, man? How's everything? Where are you this week?
This week I'm in Guatemala with family and friends, and yeah, super happy to be here. So, how about you? Where in the world are you these days, Ab?
I'm currently in Paris. I'm spending some time here, great city, and just doing a little bit of traveling, working. It's been some exciting days at Bando. I think that Tuesday was we transacted 50% more than all of our volume in May, and in May is when we launched. So it's the classical thing of start small, think big, scale fast. We are definitely going through that, and yeah, I don't know, really exciting days. Also, I'm gonna talk a little bit about in Espacio Crypto. We are right now executing the startup house with StarkNet with 10 teams in Monterrey, Mexico. It's been really thrilling to be close to this team, helping them make progress in their startup journey. And as every week, man, I want to start talking about the essay that we published. This we are writing the best essays about crypto in frontier markets, and this week I really love this title that Joker aced. This it's Schrodinger's all-time high. We are nerds. We love physics. We love crypto. We love finance, and this title I find it really thrilling. Also, we published our episode with Nathan that he's responsible for Dev Connect and DevCon in the Ethereum Foundation, and we chatted about the different, basically what's happening in Dev Connect in Argentina. So if you haven't listened to that, you should go. And man, I would love to chat about this specific the essay that we wrote about. Basically, it analyzes Bitcoin's all-time high, and I don't know what you think about this, but I saw everyone celebrating Bitcoin all-time high in dollars, but it haven't reached all-time high in Mexican pesos. So it's a weird feeling because the whole industry is looking and celebrating at this, and everyone that specifically in Mexico couldn't celebrate because we didn't have like a specific all-time high. And this essay analyzes. It's called the Schrodinger all-time high because was it an all-time high? Was it not an all-time high? It was an all-time high, a Bitcoin all-time high in dollars, but not in Mexican pesos and several other currencies. So based on what we wrote, what was the main factor for you to for the dollar for Bitcoin to hit an all-time high in dollars and not, for example, in euros, it was 1.2% away from the all-time high versus gold, it's 9.8% to the all-time high. So I don't know, mixed feelings.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, obviously, really pleased and happy that we did end up reaching these all-time highs. I think it's sort of like if your currency devalues itself infinitely, like can you really be celebrating and benchmarking the appreciation of another asset against that currency? I think gold is probably like a really comparable benchmark, right? Being sort of the world's reserve and safe store of value. So the fact that Bitcoin is sort of 10 percent away from an all-time high there, I think is somewhat indicative of perhaps the real value that Bitcoin has in the world today, right? And so that's likely the fairest benchmark, saying, Bitcoin is, for example, Argentine pesos, like 20% above its previous all-time highs. That doesn't really say very much, right? We know the peso generally has really high inflation. Same with the Turkish lira, right? So like really, really great, really exciting. But I think we have to think about these in sort of absolute terms, rather than these relative terms. So yeah, I mean, how do you think this, through the lens of sort of the emerging market angle, and what is implied in Bitcoin reaching these all-time highs, and specifically what this means for people in emerging markets with perhaps weaker
Yeah,
currencies?
yeah. So just a couple of information. So towards the all-time high, Bitcoin had a 12.7% change versus the previous all-time high. But for example, versus the British pound, it only barely reached the all-time high, and it was higher by 1.8%. The Mexican peso was higher by 1%. Brazilian real, it's higher by 2.3%. The Korean won just 2.1%. And I think that this this is more a macro story than a Bitcoin story, obviously. And I don't know. For me, it's super obvious, and I think that all Frontera followers, it'll be super obvious also. And the story is that the dollar has been in a path of devaluation, or and like the markets are really starting to lose trust in the dollar, so they are buying dollars to move their assets elsewhere. And obviously they might be moving them to Bitcoin, but not only to Bitcoin, but towards the euro, towards the Mexican peso, towards other fiat currencies. And I feel my macro mind tells me that this is something that will be, I don't think it'll be a long-term systemic event, because the dollars is still the world reserve currency right now, with everything happening with the big beautiful bill, the stablecoin act, the Genius Act coming really soon. I think that we'll see the dollar win a lot of strength in the days to come. But the reality is that in frontier markets, the key message for me is that you cannot put frontier markets all in the same bucket. Why do I say that? Because when we analyze Bitcoin's all-time high versus the Argentinian peso, it's 18.3% higher, to the Turkish lira 25.5% higher, but versus the Mexican peso 1% and Brazilian real 2%. So if you say, oh, okay, emerging markets or frontier markets, they are completely different. And what we try to do is, between those differences, uh, finds different patterns. And a pattern that I see is that the weak currencies will only get super weaker, and some like currencies, like for example the Mexican peso, that have the advantage of being close to the US. So um, if tariffs are not really high for Mexico, there could be some arbitrage there to import to Mexico and then send the products to the US. So as a global builder, you need to understand that the use cases are really localized. And if you want to build for frontier markets, you're going to need to have a lot of frontier knowledge localized.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I actually think the dollar, specifically with the Big Beautiful Act as well, and the amount of liquidity that it injects into the system, and Jerome Powell actually stepping down, or according to some sources, potentially even being fired by Trump. But regardless, he will be out of the position, in short order. So, and likely Trump will choose somebody who is, much more prone to lower rates, with a much faster mandate. So I do think that ultimately ends up leading to a weakened dollar. And unsurprisingly, like, we'll probably see Bitcoin continue to escalate and grow relative to the value of, the dollar, right? So, I think good news to some extent for people perhaps in emerging markets, whereby perhaps your currency will have a little bit more strength depending on its relationship to the dollar. But yeah, it's still sort of a wait and see moment. And again, I think a lot of the macro shifts will ultimately determine, where this ends up, landing with regards to Bitcoin's valuation.
Yeah, definitely. I really love this essay. This was one of my favorites. Joker is doing a great work. I love the way that we build this. Like every Monday, we talk about some ideas, we define the bullets, and then he does the magic. So you should subscribe to the Frontera newsletter if you haven't yet. You must. Yeah, the best essays about crypto in emerging markets. And following on the news, so PicPay is offering crypto 1 year this after I was about to say this pause, speaking some Portuguese, but PicPay it's reopening its crypto offering 1 year later, 1 year after they deactivated the system. And just a little bit of information: PicPay is a fintech company of Brazil. They have more than 60 million users. Basically, they are a payments app, and they are one of the largest payment companies in Latin America. So this is similar to something maybe like PayPal activating crypto in the US, but for emerging markets. And as we've said a lot before, Brazil is one of the most important emerging markets, and Brazilians are some of the people in emerging markets that are more prone to use crypto because they have a really heavy investing culture. So I would love to know, what do you think about this news? What does this mean to the ecosystem? Why do they reactivated their crypto offering 1 year after they deactivated it?
It's the typical sort of bull bear cycle, right? Is like crypto comes in, it's hot, and then people like prices go down and people shift away from it. You know, Twitter at one point had like NFTs as profile pictures, and then they deactivated it. And I wouldn't be surprised if NFTs become hot again. That Twitter will probably reactivate that feature again. So, you know, I think that's just typical bull market behavior. Let's put it that way. Are you seeing any like? Have you seen any other products recently try to relaunch with crypto?
I think that this might be the final launch. Why? Because right now we have stablecoins, and before it was more about trading and speculation. And for a payments company, it makes a lot more. It's a lot more intelligent to activate crypto now that stablecoins are a global payment rail. So I really see that why PicPay did this. And also remember, well, reading the news, the people at PicPay said that activating crypto is part of their long-term strategy. It's really interesting to see why when companies say this, because it tells a lot about their narrative. Basically, whenever a company makes like a public statement, it's more about the narrative that they want to build rather than the actions that they're doing. When I don't know, the market says the news, it's more about what they're doing, I think. And why do I say this? Because I think that all this is part of the thesis that all fintech companies will enable crypto rails in some way, shape, or form. And this is critical for Brazil in all the environment that we've been seeing, that the Brazilian regulators want to forbid certain amount of withdrawals of stablecoins each day and month. So I think that, and the second most important fintech company in Brazil activating crypto is just part of the validation of how stablecoins are going global. And actually, we're having some really cool stablecoin episodes in the next couple of weeks. I won't say more, but we've done a lot of local stablecoins, and now we'll go about like USD stablecoins in Latin America.
Yeah, you know what's also interesting is that Brazil a month ago, which we covered, just implemented this like flat tax on crypto as well, right? And so it's 17.5%. It's not insignificant. And so there is so much demand from the Brazilian market that even despite this quite high tax, people, or the bet of PicPay is actually, hey, people actually want to get access to this. So I think it's just like incredibly bullish. I think probably market cycle wise, we're probably entering stage four, right? The last stage, a stage of euphoria. At least that's what this indicates to me. I'm curious, like how you think about this cyclically and what these announcements mean.
Well, yeah, I feel a lot of euphoria out there, and also this is the most aggressive part of the cycle, right? And I think that it's gonna be super interesting to see how Bitcoin it's finally kind of decoupling from, at least from the US dollar. And I also believe that stable coins will start to decouple from crypto prices. Stablecoin liquidity was an indicator of which phase of the market we were. As the market cap increases, the assumption was that new money was entering into Bitcoin specifically or altcoins, and now I don't think that's true. That's We are starting to see a decouple of that because people want the stablecoin as a means of payment and not as a way to enter a trade. So we are entering a new phase where these different variables are something that we haven't seen before. And I'm really excited because this is the moment in crypto where sub products really start to evolve. The moment in crypto where sub industries really are created. The payments industry, the DeFi industry, the real world asset industry, and that's the moment where, for example, making a comparison to the internet, that's when today the retail industry in the internet is decoupled from the, I don't know, the financial industry. In the beginning of the internet, the dot-com bubble was, everyone was in the same train, that basically they were wrecked, right? That's crypto in the last cycles. I think that in ongoing, we're gonna see like this different segmentation inside the industry. And for emerging markets, this is really interesting because something like payments is a lot more prevalent in these frontier markets than in markets like Europe or the US. Something like investing is more interesting in advanced markets. So watching the different use cases by region, it's gonna also be a really interesting evolution that we'll report weekly here at Frontera.
Totally. It was funny because I saw this news item the other day that was like, um, Fox News was covering stable coins and they had like the price of USDT on the screen and it was just like $1. And they were like, stable coins are $1, you know? So I think it represents sort of the decoupling here of the news cycles. And, but yeah, I mean, I suppose like ultimately what I hope for is that we don't end up getting too burnt, and retail doesn't end up getting burnt, as you know, PicPay and other these more like retail oriented apps unlock um, access to crypto essentially.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and at the end, it's the same matter of education. I
Yep.
mean, you just create a product offering and afterwards the people come, right?
Yep.
And man, moving along to the next news, it's super, I don't know, when I read this, it was super interesting for me. So there's this company called Grupo Murano, that they are a real estate company based out of Mexico. They are listed in Nasdaq, and basically they said that they are investing around of $10 billion to create a Bitcoin treasury. So basically, what they're doing is creating a new MicroStrategy, or well, now strategy. And one of the founders, and well, the CEO of the company, went into a Bitcoin podcast to explain his vision on why they were doing this. And also, if you go to Murano is murano.com.mx, basically they are, this cannot be a more Bitcoiner website. The landing page is basically a Bitcoin, and it reads, Murano is a publicly listed real estate developer and operator who is also pursuing a Bitcoin treasury initiative. So right in front of the user. And I was also reading the release details of this news. And basically, what they say is that they are creating this Bitcoin treasury and they are offering a SEPA, that is a standby equity purchase agreement of $500 million, where basically this budget is to buy Bitcoin. So I want to talk a little bit more about this. So this is a real estate company that is valued at $800 million. That's their market cap. And a SEPA is like a credit line where they can create new stock, and there will be a buyer for that stock, and the total amount will be $500 million. So they are starting with this credit line to buy Bitcoin and then do the strategy that is basically creating debt, buying Bitcoin, more debt, buy Bitcoin, more debt, buy Bitcoin, and with the revenues of the company repay that debt slowly. And I found this super interesting because now we have strategy in the US, we have Melius in Brazil, we have Grupo Murano in Mexico. It's a company that operates in Mexico but is listed in Nasdaq. So basically, do you think that this company could be the next MicroStrategy?
I mean, I don't know if like the next MicroStrategy. I think we'll see a plurality of MicroStrategies like emerging across the region, giving different investors access to a very similar strategy. Like we spoke about the Brazilian quote unquote MicroStrategy. We talked about the Japanese one. Now there's the Mexican play as well. I think it's all about distributing and ensuring people have access to some sort of exposure, perhaps even levered exposure to Bitcoin, right? So what I think is more exciting is just like this is surely entering the zeitgeist and a lot of the big capital allocators, for this group to say we're going to allocate $10 billion towards this specific initiative, I think is super exciting, basically, right? And I think that it will, my hope in the long run is that it serves as yet another case study of, hey, if you're like a large multinational corporation, you should certainly be looking at how you can be allocating and maximizing your upside, right? And it's a kind of like right now when I have a lot of conversations with sort of larger institutional investors, I think the benchmark should always be like, are you beating Bitcoin's gains, right? Like anything I think ultimately should be benchmarked against Bitcoin's growth, right? Which is right now sort of averaging out to about 69% a year over the course of the last 15 years. So again, I think that's super, super important. Murano stock, interestingly, hasn't like necessarily been performing that well. And I think a lot of people are like SBET, right, which was the Ethereum play as well. It's like you take these companies that maybe aren't super hot and then what's like the last month look like? So if you even look at like the 1 month performance, it sort of feels like the gains are going to be somewhat muted here for investors trying to like capture the same play because it just becomes somewhat repetitive, and I think people know where it heads. And also the question is like, well, how much more do we have to run? And we talked about us being perhaps in the last phase of this, yes, very volatile and exciting cycle, but it won't last forever.
Yeah. What I see is that when you see the Murano stock price in 1 month, it's down 11%, but 5 days, it's up 10%, almost 11. And when you see the Melius, basically, I think that we are in Melius around of April, where we reported this. Like they announced it, then they announced that they purchased Bitcoin, and Melius stock went from 2.99 to 10, and then it crashed to 7, but from 2 to or 3 to 7.92, I mean, it's not a bad trade. And also I think that the sustainability of these companies is going to be proved in the long run, not today. So let's see how it evolves. It's interesting that we are seeing new companies like this in Latin America. And man, I'd love you to take us through the story of the IMF. This is something that you are really interested in. I think that you are one of the most knowledgeable people in frontier markets, specifically in Central America, because you are natively from there. So what's this news about?
Yes. So the really exciting news that we keep talking about is, and we were just talking about like big allocators of capital, right, towards Bitcoin. There are no bigger allocators than countries, right? And so, or very few other bigger allocators than countries. And I think specifically for countries, I think this is the best investment that where they could be storing sovereign assets. So we've been very much so covering how exciting it is that El Salvador has been buying more and more Bitcoin and so on. If you look at the Bitcoin office of El Salvador, which by the way is an official office out of the government in El Salvador, they keep claiming like we just bought more Bitcoin, we just bought more Bitcoin, we just bought more Bitcoin, and every day they're in theory acquiring Bitcoin. The International Monetary Fund, with whom El Salvador reached an agreement with for a $1.4 billion loan program earlier in the year, recently published this very in-depth report that essentially said, actually, they're not buying Bitcoin, they're just moving Bitcoin. So they're consolidating their Bitcoin. So you can look at it one of two ways, right? So there's the angle that says, okay, so the Bitcoin office of El Salvador is perhaps not being completely honest with the way they're handling their Bitcoin, and I don't think this our position is necessarily to like make a statement on that without having much more complete data. But that's one way of spinning that. The other way of spinning that is that actually maybe if this does end up being true, what this means is that El Salvador basically bought a bunch more Bitcoin at much cheaper prices. So their new Bitcoin purchases, or it's really just Bitcoin that they're like reporting now that they bought, which they bought at 50% of the price, 25% of the price, like much cheaper prices. So either way, I think that this, Bukele has come out to refute this claim, and so it seems like quite contentious. But the IMF has explicitly stated that they want El Salvador to reduce its exposure and engagement with Bitcoin. So why do you think the IMF would do two things? One, ask governments and countries to not engage deeply with Bitcoin, and why would they then choose to publish this kind of report?
Well, for me, it's really obvious. Is basically the IMF is one of the entities around the world that has that is deeply embedded with the traditional financial system. Basically, they use the dollar as their basic currency. And the thing is that Bitcoin is they cannot control Bitcoin. They can control part of the funds that they use in the dollar, then they can have a say in global macro scenarios and where to invest money in dollars. But basically, if a country demands or starts using Bitcoin, it's a parallel system. So in the long term, they wouldn't have any incentive to engage with the IMF. I think it's a matter of fear and the classical innovator's dilemma at a macro international monetary organism. They could start looking at Bitcoin, but they'll need to kill their current operation and business. And humans don't like killing whatever they're doing to do other thing that has more potential. So yeah, that's why I see it. And why do they make print this report? Because I think that they don't want to be seen as fools, right? So saying like we said El Salvador to stop doing this, they claim that they are continuing to do it, but in reality they're not. And I think that I mean they should have a they obviously did their due diligence, right? And maybe El Salvador reported all the wallets and everything, and now they're consolidating. So they're saying like they are in line. It's something like when the teacher tells the I don't know a creative child that just can't stay put, like stay put and don't move, and the child in his head is like not like with a lot of activity, but in the outside they are just like calm because they need to be in line with the professor.
Yep. No, I think this is again this like sort of old world new world tension that's arising. So
Perfect. So, on the last news of this week, as I said, we are in Espacio Crypto executing the startup house with Starnet. 10 teams in Monterrey, 3 days, helping them move along and grow their product. We had some amazing workshops like with Chris Narvaez from Rayo Capital. Also, it was hosted in El Tec de Monterrey. That's basically the most important technology university in Mexico. In this really cool venue. That it's like a venture cafe. We are doing obviously a ton of content about it, and I don't know, man. I think that I'm really excited about this type of events because they are stepping stones. They're not always perfect. We see that teams are immature, but we need to accelerate this. So I think that these type of efforts and similar efforts that you run at Odisea are basically raising the bar slowly but steadily. What's your input here? What do you think of this type of events?
yeah, I'm curious like what was the key takeaway? I know you weren't there, but like what are you seeing that's been really exciting for you guys at this event? And like what have you learned? What have you seen from the different founders at the startup house and so on?
I think that the most important thing is that what we learned is that it's not the same level of maturity that you can find in different regions of the world than in frontier markets. So in Frontera, we wrote this the emerging market trilemma, where you need capital, problems, and talent. And I reinforce this thesis on why importing talent from other regions in the world, I think it's a positive thing. It's like, I don't know, for example, the guys at Etherfuse, they have a great team and they are hiring people in the region, and maybe they create the next generation of founders, or people like Dollar App, right? I think that's great. And I say that because finding like raw talent that wants to build in crypto right now in emerging markets is it's super hard, but opportunities are huge. So it's a big reason to find the right team and invest on them. And also another key takeaway is how basically in our country, in Mexico, the most relevant use case is payments, international transfers, trade finance, peer-to-peer payments, and there are a lot of startups building around that. So yeah, I think that those are my two takeaways. Also, not just because we did it, but it's so important to have someone with feet in the ground. And why do I say this? Because we landed one of the best venues in Mexico. Like, it's incredible, and Tec de Monterrey was super open to help. But if you are someone from, I don't know, the US trying to do something like this, and you go to Colombia, basically you're gonna be lost. You don't know. You land in the airport and you don't know how to move. So historically, emerging markets, you need local guides, and if you think that you don't need them, you're gonna you can succeed, but it's gonna cost you a lot, or you just can accelerate your path and collaborate with local serious people.
I love El Tec de Monterrey. Joel, who's the head of technology transfer there, is a really close friend, and he was like one of the first Microsoft employees in Latin America, so he knows a lot about tech expansion in the region as well. And yeah, I think one of those people that I think is a great bridge between the old world and the new world, and can open up opportunities at incredible institutions like El Tec. So no, I'm super stoked, and great job to the Espacio Crypto team on that. So awesome. Well, this has been a super fun recording. I'm looking forward to this like series that we have coming up as well with some key people, and let's go.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Kush. You can follow me at AbrahamCR. You can follow Kush at 0xKush. And as always, thank you for listening, and see you next time.
Peace.